Good evening, my name's Garrett, and welcome to The Last Call. Tonight's episode's a little different. We're going to be talking about gift sets. With the holiday season coming up here, gift sets are on every shelf, every end cap, and about every store you can see. So we're going to be kind of talking about a few of them I picked up here recently, just a few, and what's in them, is it worth your money, and overall, who are these gifts for? Now, don't click off the video if you're not a whiskey drinker. We're only going to be talking about the packages themselves, not doing any kind of taste testing. Very quick little blurbs on each of these, so you can get an idea if it's worth your money, if it's a good gift for a certain somebody, and overall, what the value is. Now, in all these packages, I will also be talking about pricing, and as we all know, pricing does vary depending on your location. So I'm going to kind of give generalized pricing on some of these bottles for what I can find online and what I find locally. So, quick tip. Now, one stipulation that I did have was the kits did not include any kind of glasses or whiskey stones. Now, mainly for one big reason. If you're buying these for any kind of whiskey drinker, there's a good chance they already have a dozen glasses. While they do look cool, another glass to them is just going to get on the shelf and it's not really going to do anything extra for it. And by the time next Christmas rolls around, they're probably already never used or been given away. So yeah, let's pull up a chair and get into it. Our first box is called the Welcome to Bourbon County. This includes 3 bottles. All these are half bottles, so 375 milliliters. Comes with a bottle of Jim Beam Black, Basil Hayden's Straight Bourbon, and Knob Creek 9 years old. If I'm looking at pricing on the individual bottles, usually Jim Beam Black I can find for about $11. Basil Hayden anywhere between $18 to $20, and Knob Creek right around the $15 to $17, and that's the half bottle pricing. Full bottle pricing, I'm usually looking at $20 to $22, $30 to $32, and $28 to $30. So you're buying this package essentially not for the money saving, but just because it's a nice little package. Now, bourbon whiskeys themselves have a nice, solid profile to their tastes. Tend to have notes of cherry and oak, sweet caramel sometimes. Sometimes they're a little drier, sometimes they're a little sweeter. You're going to get sometimes a little bit of spice in there. And overall, it's the most common thing, especially here in the United States, people drink. Now, who's this collection for? First and foremost, it's for the bourbon drinker. This person doesn't like scotch, they're not big into normal whiskeys, or kind of changing up profiles too much. With how bourbon goes, these people tend to like other bourbons, 1792, Woodinville. There's so many different brands out there for bourbon whiskey that they all have a similar but different enough profile. There's a good chance the individual probably has had Jim Beam Black or even just regular Jim Beam, and a very good chance for Knob Creek. The Basil Hayden's probably the one outlier in this bottle set because it is one of those more expensive bottles and tends to get a rap of being too expensive for what it's offering depending on who you talk to. But the bourbon drinkers are going to know these brands, they're going to know the names, and this is going to be a similar wheelhouse to what they already like, and there's nothing wrong with that. The next person this is for is the whiskey enthusiast. Maybe this individual is just more recently starting to get into whiskeys, which is really big right now. This will allow them to try out 3 things coming from Bourbon County to do an A, B, and C comparison. What makes Jim Beam different than the Basil Hayden, than the Knob Creek? And this will let them kind of play around with these profiles to really get an idea on what they like about bourbon or maybe not like about bourbon. On top of that, there's a good chance they may not have picked up these bottles because they're out hunting for more unique bottles and say, I can pick these ones up anytime because they are common. And that plays into your favor with either of these individuals, because if they go, wow, I really like any of these bottles, they're usually pretty common to find and for the most part, pretty cheap and easy on the pocketbook in that budget area for you. Next up we have Dewar's Discovery Pack. This little collection here includes a bottle, full bottle, 750 milliliters of Dewar's 12-year-old. Also includes 2 tasting bottles. These are 50 milliliter bottles, so much smaller. A 15-year-old Dewar's and an 18-year-old Dewar's. Now, the interesting thing here was the cost. So this little bundle here I picked up at Total Wine for just shy of $24. It was like 23 and some change. In my market, Dewar's 12 usually runs about $22 to $24. So essentially, I'm buying a bottle of Dewar's and getting to try two substantially older scotches here, which is a nice little bundle. And again, being that budget friendly, it's a solid gift. Now, when it comes to the smaller tasting bottles, usually Dewar's 15 I can find right around the $35 to $40, and the Dewar's 18 starts jumping up a price at $80-ish, anywhere between $70 and $80. Now, blended scotches in general are going to have a little bit different with their tasting profiles than what whiskey offers. You're going to find things like dried fruit notes, citrus, spices. You're also going to get maybe some little bit of smoke, a little bit of earthiness, sometimes dark chocolate. You're going to find some really interesting profiles here, especially being in that budget range. So who's this pack for? Your first person obviously being the blended scotch drinker. They're already in that area. They already like that smoky, the peaty, the fruitiness notes that can come out. And overall, they have already had probably Dewar's of some caliber. There's tons of different versions of it. So even if you give them a 12, there's a good chance they might not have had the 15 or the 18 yet. And the 12 is, again, just a good, solid option for blended scotches. This person might already love those smoky and peaty things that we hear about, where they have you smell it and you go, wow, that smells like a campfire. That's those kind of people. This is also for the Whiskey Explorer as well. They're going to be able to get to sit down with this one, similar to the Bourbon County pack, with seeing what changed between the 12, the 15, and the 18. Being able to compare those and learn what whiskey can do with the same whiskey. These are just older versions, and that's kind of the interesting thing, is that they can go, wow, the 12 reminds me of this, but the 18 gives me so much more of this. And they can really kind of play around things and find out what they like in blended scotches. And again, the nice thing for you, even if it's not in a pack, Dewar's 12 is accessible in most areas and relatively inexpensive. Again, right around that $23 to $20-ish. The other two might maybe a little bit more in your area, specifically the 18, but these are still great options for people to give you an idea on what they really like. And even if they're not into scotches, this is an option for a lot of people to do scotch and sodas and mix them up that way. And sometimes, it isn't a bad option for that either, because it's a low enough budget option to really kind of mix it up and try new things with it. And next up, we have Master of the Manhattan Cocktail Kit. Now, wait. Pause. I know I said that I wasn't including anything with whiskey stones or glasses. This is neither. Now hold tight. I wrote out the script that I'm not following, so you're just going to have to wait and see why I picked this kit out. So let's start over and say that this includes a bottle of Lot 40 100% rye Canadian whiskey and a jar of Luxardo maraschino cherries. I picked up this set for $37 at Total Wine, and as soon as I seen this, I knew I had to grab it. When it comes to pricing on the bottle itself, usually Lot 40 I can get on Flaviar.com for about $33. Locally, however, I know two places I can get this. One place sells it for about $37, $38, and the second place sells it for about $45, $47. So a little bit pricey on this bottle. The Luxardo cherries, however, this jar in here runs at about $22 to $25. Yes, that is why I picked this set, and you're probably going, what do you mean that much for a thing of cherries? Luxardo cherries are some of the best for cocktails and just in general, an amazing maraschino cherry. Now, the Lot 40 whiskey is an interesting one because this was actually a brand that went away for a while and was really popular though. And more recently has started coming back and really hitting roots again. Now, Canadian ryes are kind of interesting, and there are going to be some nuances to this one. Canadian whiskey tends to be softer notes. You're going to get a little sweeter notes. And rye is completely different in Canada versus here in the United States. Here in the United States, we tend to have rye whiskeys as being herbal, medicinal, floral. you have these very pungent flavors sometimes. Up in Canada, however, rye whiskey is completely different. You're going to get subtle medicinal and herbal, sometimes even sweet in those areas. And the Lot 40 itself, you're going to pull out, grain, you're going to pull out bread notes, a little bit of sweetness in there. And overall, you're just going to have a different profile from what rye in the United States versus rye in Canada. Now, one other thing to note, while they call this the Manhattan cocktail kit, you are missing two things to make a true Manhattan. The first one being Angostura bitters, and then you're also going to need some sweet vermouth, which I'll put links to some options down below, specifically Angostura bitters. I have a link through Amazon that I'll share with you guys. But both can be found relatively inexpensive at most of your grocery stores and liquor stores. Angostura bitters, maybe $5 to $7 tops. And sweet vermouth, you're looking for usually under $10 for most brands. And again, if you forget those, they actually tell you on the back here, here's the recipe, which is fantastic. Now, who's this kit for? Well, the obvious first thing is the mixologist. This person likes to make their own drinks or is interested in making their own drinks. Both the Lot 40 and the cherries themselves are going to elevate their bar collection because they are very versatile things, not only just for Manhattans, but for old fashions and any other mixed drink out there. There's a lot of them that use rye, and they'll get to play around with a Canadian rye a little bit and see what they can make up. And again, those cherries themselves are just the cherry on top, for the lack of better words, to about anything that needs a maraschino cherry. This can also be for the rye drinker. There are some people out there that love rye. Now again, this is going to be a little bit different for them because if they're used to American rye, this is going to be a little bit of a change of pace for them. They may or may not like it. That is a possibility. However, the changing up of Canadian rye is a very interesting experience, and I definitely recommend it. And then the last person this is for is the Canadian drinker. There's probably just about as many Canadian drinkers out there as there are rye drinkers, I'm going to guess. Not super high on that list. However, Lot 40 is a very, very solid Canadian whiskey, and it just is one of those bottles that I highly recommend to a lot of people if you have it in your area. Also, for those of you that are not big into whiskeys or mixed drinks in general, the Luxardo cherries do an amazing job with cherry cokes. Take a couple of these, put them in the bottom of your glass, mash it up just a little bit, add in a little bit of Collins grenadine, and then put in your Coke. You'll have an amazing cherry Coke that it's hard not to enjoy. Next up, we have Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Collection. Now, personally, I find this one has a pretty solid value, even though I ended up buying this for $86. A little bit high on the price point at first, but once we break it down, you'll see where that value comes from. Now, this collection itself comes with three 375 milliliter bottles, so half bottle sized, the single barrel rye, the single barrel select, and the single barrel barrel proof. So a lot of barrels involved here, but again, we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. So in my market, I can usually find the single barrel rye and the single barrel select right around $30-ish, usually a little bit more take, upwards to $35 for the half bottle. And then the single barrel barrel proof can sometimes go up to $40+ easily. Full bottles of these, you're looking at another world almost. So you're actually looking at usually about $60-ish on the rye and then the select, and sometimes up to $70+ for the barrel proof versions. So the interesting thing about this collection is the barreling on it. Under most circumstances, barrels are put on conveyor belts, poured out into each other, and they do some intermingling. And that's not a bad thing. But the single barrels mean that this bottle was only from one barrel, and they can guarantee that. So your single barrel select and rye were essentially uncorked from their cask, cut down to a lower percentage of alcohol, and then bottled. Where your single barrel barrel proof is essentially they uncorked that cask, poured it into a bottle, and called it a day. So much higher in its alcohol content. I think this one here was a 62% compared to the normal 40s to 45s. So a lot higher alcohol content on that one. Jack Daniel's is one of those brands that is probably one of the most recognizable names out there. So what makes Tennessee whiskey is that it actually goes through a charcoal filtering process. This is something that has been now put into law, that Tennessee whiskey, charcoal filtering go together. And it's really interesting because the idea behind it is it removes some of the impurities and makes it a little bit more approachable and smoother. Jack Daniel's tends to have some notes of brown sugar, cinnamon, sometimes a little sweet like honey. You're going to get maybe a little bit of oak in there, a little bit of maple. So very approachable flavors, and that fits right into the wheelhouse. Now the rye, on the other hand, you're going to pick up some more on the similar ryes that we talked about in the episode. You're going to get a little bit of herbal quality, that little bit of medicinal quality, maybe even some iodine quality into that. So it's going to be, out of the 3 bottles, the more different one that you're going to get approached with. So who's this kit for? Well, the first person being the Jack Daniel's drinker. They drank Jack because their ancestors before them drank it. The ancestors before them drank it. It is a very cultural thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, there's a lot of times these people tend to drink what they know. They don't like to branch out too much, or they might see these on the shelf and be interested, but go, do I really want to spend the money on, $30 to $40 maybe on something I may not like, or should I stick with my normal $20 to $25 bottle and call it a day? That's where this person's going to get to try 3 things of a similar wheelhouse of Jack Daniel's and still get to experience that differently. And yet again, this is also for your whiskey enthusiast. This is the person that is going to be able to sit down and try 3 things that are a little bit more expensive and really kind of tell what that barrel proof does differently. The spice different content, the flavor profile content different. All those kind of things are going to be interesting to that whiskey explorer, so they can really get an idea what makes Tennessee whiskey Tennessee whiskey. The last person I would probably recommend this for is the bourbon drinker. A lot of times your bourbon people reach over to Tennessee whiskey because they are similar in some aspects. Again, they tend to be smoother notes, a little bit more approachable, but overall tend to be still a bottle a lot of people grab for. And these 3 bottles being pretty high cost, they may not have these on a shelf. Not only do they look cool, they sound cool, but they're actually really great to drink as well. Next up, we have Grangestone, which is a Highland single malt whiskey. This comes with 3 375 milliliter bottles, and it comes with one that is bourbon cask finished, comes with one that is sherry cask finished, and one that is rum cask finished. This brand itself seems to be exclusive to Total Wine, and I picked this up for $50. And each of the bottles themselves usually run at about $16 a piece at the half bottle size. And the rum cask and bourbon cask for full bottles usually run at about $30-ish, with the sherry cask going a little bit higher. So not a huge savings on this one as a whole set, but it was interesting enough that I decided to grab it. The interesting thing Grangestone has done here is the finishing, which means after they're done with whatever they want to do with the whiskey for its age, they put it into a different barrel and let it sit there for usually upwards to 6 months, not usually any longer than that. So essentially they've taken a bourbon cask, a sherry one, and a rum one, poured their whiskey in it, sealed it up, let it sit there for some time, and pull out these interesting notes that each bottle will give you. Your sherry cask finish tends to bring in some more fruitier notes, little bit of dried fruit, sweetness. Your rum cask is going to usually bring in some spices, a little bit of sweetness as well, but tends to lean into sweeter like molasses or sugar versus the sherry, which is more sugary like fruit sugars. And then your bourbon are going to bring in more earth tones, so your oak notes, your vanillas, and cherry notes, things like that. Now, Grangestone, again, being as a Total Wine exclusive, is very much a budget option. There is not a lot of things going high here, and for the most part, it's very simple to most people, and that's kind of the question on who this one is for. Grangestone itself tends to be a little bit easier to drink, not as complex or crazy flavors as a lot of other Scotch brands, but one of those good introductions to what a Highland can do in each of these types of casks. So who's this set for? Well, obviously the first one is going to be your Scotch drinker, but more or less your intro Scotch drinkers. Your people that are seasoned or have been drinking scotches for a while may not care for this one because of how simple or maybe just doesn't fit to their profile. But your intro to scotch drinkers are going to be able to try something to see, oh, this is what a rum cask does, and I kind of like that, or I really don't think sherry cask is my thing. But this will give them an idea of what Grangestone can do in those casks. The other person being the Whiskey Explorer. This may be a set that is not 100% accessible to them, and it's not a brand that a lot of people talk about because of that. So a lot of times people overlook it because it's just not something they've heard of, or the big whiskey names aren't talking about it. And not that that's a problem, but it's just one of those things to know. So your Whiskey Explorer is going to be able to sit down and try something that maybe a lot of people haven't yet, and be able to see those nuanced differences. And then they can branch out from there and try other things and compare this bourbon cask Highland to another bourbon cask, or same thing with the rum cask. This lets them kind of have a pivot point to move on from. And with Grangestone being our last set, let's go ahead and wrap up this episode. So here we go, there's the full crowd again. The only thing we didn't cover on today's episode is the small tasting bottles that I had up front. Due to the length of this video, there was just not enough time to fit them in. So I'll be posting a second video with those specifically. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be linked up above, down below, and at the end of the video, so you can watch that. But I wanted to kind of wrap this up saying that all these sets are pretty interesting, and I think they all have their case basis. And I hope to have shared some information about these to find the right case for the right person. Now, by no means am I an expert at this. Never claimed to be, at least never honestly claimed to be an expert. But if you have questions about these boxes, let me know down in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer it. Or if you find a bundle that you're wondering if it's a good idea or a good price, let me know down below as well, because I'll at least do my little bit of research that I can, especially because market pricing, as we talked about, varies depending on your market. But I'll at least be able to give you somewhat of an idea if it's a good idea, or I'll try my best. How about that? I'll at least say I'll try my best. So, as always, I hope your last drink of the night for yourself and the person you're buying a gift for is the best one.
You know, and I